that I'm going to ask that if anybody has any questions, they kind of hold them until the end. I should have time at the end to answer questions. If it's something you think you're going to forget to ask, if you could just type it into the chat, and we'll go through the chat logs at the end and see if we can get some questions from there. So my name's Sean Hannam. I'm the New York State PTA Treasurer. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. It's nice to have you guys here. Taking time away from your family to do PTA stuff. So I do appreciate it. So we're going to get started. So I'm not keeping you here any longer than we need to. Maybe, there we go. So we're going to start with the basics. What's a treasurer? Treasurer plays a key role in the ongoing operation of each PTA unit. They're the custodian of the unit's finances and must ensure there are appropriate internal controls to prevent misuse of funds. Treasurer guides the unit in making sure there are enough funds available to provide the programs and services your unit wish to make available. And lastly, the treasurer makes sure the required reports are provided to the membership in the IRS. So what does that all actually mean? It means that there's certain duties that the treasurer takes on when they agree to become the treasurer. First and perhaps most important is to maintain accurate, detailed financial records. The second most important thing is to help prepare the PTA budget. We'll talk about the budget in a little bit. Any receiving and dispersing of funds should be done, maybe not physically by the treasurer for all of it, but you should certainly be aware of any funds that are coming in or going out of the PTA unit. Reporting on finances at all PTA meetings, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. This is also very important. Ensure that the monthly financial reconciliation is completed. To make sure that the IRS tax return is completed, whether that's your 990EZ or your 990N. Prepare the books for your annual audit and ensure that the audit is completed, and update financial procedures as necessary. That last one is really, really important. Any unit should have, basically, when you're talking about the treasury, you should have money handling guidelines. There should be procedures. They should be written down somewhere in a procedures document so everybody knows what they are and they can't argue, well, we used to do it this way, we did it this way, somebody did it that way. They should all be written down and codified so everybody's following the same procedures. Some guidelines I have here, for example, obviously no signing of blank checks. All checks should have 2 unrelated signers on every check that goes out. Bank statements should be reconciled monthly. Report that you're going to give at every meeting is reflected in the meeting minutes. Most important is never ever deposit PTA funds into a personal or school account. If you take money home from a fundraiser, you should, if it's not possible to deposit it, on the way home from the fundraiser, definitely get it deposited by the next day or as soon as possible. Don't put it into your personal account and say, oh, well, I'll do it next week or something like that. It just opens up a can of worms that, people will think you're embezzling funds or something like that, and nobody wants to have to deal with that. And never, ever, ever put it into a school account. We'll get into reasons why later. There's a lot of IRS, regulations about money going into your account versus another organization's account, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Not just the money, but keep all of the PTA funds separate from school or other groups' funds. So, for example, the school might say to you, well, the school doesn't, this 5th grade class doesn't have a bank account. Can we put money in yours? And, you can just give it to us when we need it. That's a big no-no. Again, it's an IRS thing, and we can talk about that when we talk about IRS issues. Ensure complete and accurate record keeping. Conducting the annual audit. And really the most important thing here is it's all about internal controls. The more you control how the money comes in, how the money goes out, how it's being kept track of, the easier it's going to make your job, and the more transparent it's going to make all the finances to your members. And really that's what a big part of your job is about, is making sure that all of these things are taken care of so that the unit members can see what's going on, and so that there's no, funny business going on with that. Okay. So the book, so there's kind of a list of things that make up. Oops, am I getting feedback?
Yeah, you're getting doubled.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the books. The books are kind of the things that you should be keeping a copy of and keeping track of as treasurer. These things are things that are really available to any member that comes to you and says that they want to see these. You should be able to produce them. You know, maybe not pull them out of your backpack in a meeting or something like that, but within a reasonable time frame, you should be able to produce these for any members that ask you. These are things like the audit reports, which we're going to talk about the monthly reconciliation of the audit reports in a little bit. The current ledger, so a current status of the money that came in, the money that went out, your current bank statements, the bank statement reconciliations, a copy of the checkbook. Obviously, you're not going to give the checkbook to members, but if you have to write checks, you should have the checkbook available to you to to write checks out of. You should keep a copy of any vouchers that come in for members requesting reimbursement if they bought something and you're reimbursing them for it. A copy of any of the bills. So if your PTA happens to have bills where you're paying for rental space or say you bought some wrapping paper that you're going to sell, things like that, the treasurer should have a copy of all of those. A copy of your bylaws and procedures. Really, any officer in your unit should have a copy of the bylaws and procedures. Always have a copy of the approved budget because members will ask, well, what does the budget say we're going to do? A copy of the meeting minutes. Again, any officer should have a copy of the meeting minutes. The letter of determination and the insurance certificate. We'll talk about both of those a little bit later, but those are very important things the treasurer should have. The tax exempt form. A copy of the previous tax filing, because you should just have it in case a member ever asks. And you should usually keep at least, maybe not bills going back for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, available to you, but at least this year's bills, maybe last year's bills available to you. Again, just in case anybody wants to see, or if you're at a meeting and they ask, well, how much did we spend on this last year? You have them somewhat available to you. Okay. So the letter of determination. So as a PTA, you're qualified for an exemption from federal income tax. New York State PTA has secured from the IRS what's called a group or blanket exemption under Section 501c3 of the IRS Code. This group or blanket exemption applies to the state's local units. Basically what that means is because the New York State PTA is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, any subgroup of ours, so all of our units are also considered 501c3 tax-exempt not-for-profit organizations. The letter of determination is basically your proof of this. So what it consists of is a letter from the IRS stating that the New York State PTA is indeed a 501c3 organization. And then it's a letter from us that states that your unit is a unit in good standing with the New York State PTA and is therefore also granted 501c3 status. This is a very important thing to have. This is the kind of thing that if you open up a bank account or if you're doing a fundraiser, if you're soliciting donations, a lot of people will ask for this proof that you are indeed a 501c3 organization. If your unit doesn't have a letter of determination, you can talk to your region director, place a request with them, and they will ensure that you get a copy of the letter. Okay. So the treasurer's report, we mentioned this is one of the things that your duty is to have this treasurer's report. The treasurer's report should be presented at every meeting. If for some reason you can't attend the meeting, you should still do the report and get it to the president so he can he or she can pass it out to the unit membership. A few things you want to make sure is that the treasurer's report should follow the bank statement month, not a calendar month or just from meeting to meeting. So if your bank statement runs from, say, the 15th of the month to the 15th of next month, that report would be everything that happened from the 15th to the 15th. Not necessarily from the 1st to the 30th, or if your meetings are on the 23rd, the 23rd to the 23rd. It should be whatever that bank statement month is. When you make the report, you should have all the records available. So if, on that report you're talking about funds that went out, you should have, as a part of that report, all of the expense vouchers available, any bills that we paid available, just in case somebody wants to see them while you're giving the report. And this report should become a part of a unit's minutes for that meeting. So it should be reflected in the unit's minutes that the treasurer's report was given for, and then the time frame. If for some reason your unit doesn't have a meeting every month, say you only meet every other month, you would then give 2 treasurer's reports, and it should be reflected that 2 reports were given, one for this time frame, one for this time frame. And if you look in the resource guide, there's actually a sample of what a monthly treasurer's report looks like. You'll see it basically is just a list of the expenditures and the intake of funds. I always like to suggest that on the report you have it versus what your budget is, so when the membership's looking, they can see exactly what your spending is compared to what was budgeted, and they can kind of see what was left. Toward the end, I'm actually going to show you, we're going to talk about budgets. I'm going to show you a sample budget. I'm going to show you a really easy way to make up this treasurer's report if you have the budget in like Excel or some other kind of spreadsheet. Monthly reconciliation. So one of the other things that you're responsible for making sure happens is the monthly reconciliation. What is it? Basically, it's a review of this past month's receipts, cash on hand, and disbursements. Basically, your monthly reconciliation is your ledger. You, as treasurer, should not be doing the monthly reconciliation. What normally you would do is you would hand the books over to somebody who is volunteered to do it at a meeting. They will go through and just make sure that what's on the bank statement matches what's in the, on your ledger. If there's any expense vouchers, they match what's on the ledger, and that everything is properly accounted for. If they happen to find any issues with the books at that particular meeting, it would go into the minutes that there were issues found and they were being addressed. Again, this is not something the treasurer should do. This is something that actually you should have just a general member do, or somebody who's not a signatory on the bank account. We actually have a sample monthly reconciliation form on the website that just gives you a quick and dirty breakdown. At the top, you would have the ledger balance from the prior month. You would put in the total receipts from this month, total cash on hand. So that's like petty cash if you had cash that isn't put into the bank account yet. Any disbursements from the last month, and that should give you the current ledger balance on hand. And then the second one, reconciling the bank and the checks, so it'll be your latest bank statement, all the checks outstanding. I would suggest you actually list which checks are outstanding. It's a good thing to know because if you've had checks that have been outstanding for 4, 5, 6 months, it's probably a good idea to follow up and make sure, It's probably a good idea to follow up with the people that you wrote those checks to and make sure that they've gotten the check first of all and find out why they haven't cashed it. So once you get that together, you put all that together to get your bank balance minus your checks outstanding. And then I don't have a slide for it, but the last line there is you're comparing your current ledger balance with the bank balance, and it should be a 0 because you should be making sure that you're accounting for everything, so you should have no discrepancies between the two. And at the bottom, your reconciliation completed by, some units only do it with one person, my particular unit, and in our region we do it with 2 people so they can kind of check each other. And they're going to certify that they've done the books for that month, and it's correct, incomplete, incorrect, or substantially correct with the following adjustments. They sign it, date it, and that goes into the minutes for that meeting. Now, the monthly reconciliation is very important because, well, I'll talk about that in a second. So it should be completed at every meeting. It can't be completed by a signatory or a relation of the signatory, so it can't be the president's wife or the treasurer's wife doing it, or husband, or however that happens. Again, it should preferably be completed by 2 people. If you have a small unit, we understand you can't have it done by 2 people. That's okay. Again, it should be for the statement month, so whatever the treasurer report you're giving is, it should be for that same time period. And it should be noted in the meeting minutes that it's done and by whom. And actually, the secretary and the treasurer should both have a copy in their records. And this is the important reason why. If your monthly reconciliations are not completed and you file an insurance claim for a financial matter, the insurance company will not honor the claim. The first thing they're going to do, if you go to them and say, we had a theft or a loss of X amount of money, they're going to ask to see all your reconciliations. So they have to be done monthly, or if something happens, you're going to be in big trouble with the insurance company. Next thing we're going to talk about is a PTA audit. People hear the word audit and, they think of the IRS is going to come and look at all your records and it's a big scary thing. It's really not. All we're talking about when we're talking about a PTA audit is basically a review. The PTA audit is a verification of the account balances and bills paid. It gives the members assurance that proper financial procedures have been followed, and it's a part of the end of year process. It should be for all PTA units. So when we're talking about an audit, we're talking about a yearly audit, not something that you have to do meeting by meeting or month by month. This is separate and distinct from the monthly reconciliation. So kind of think of the reconciliation as your checkup every month to make sure that things are okay. The audit is your big yearly checkup to make sure things are okay. Now, some units that are bigger units that are bringing in, hundreds of thousands of dollars, they might do the audit twice a year just because it's easier for them to do it at a 6-month basis and then a 1-year basis, just for ease of use. So it doesn't have to be just a yearly thing. You can do it every 6 months if you have a big enough unit, but it needs to be done definitely every year. I'm sorry, was somebody asking a question? I couldn't hear. I'm going to ask that everybody holds their questions until the very end. We should have plenty of time for questions at the end, just because there's a lot of slides, and I've actually found that a lot of times I'll get questions that are answered like on the next slide or two. So if you have any questions, again, just kind of hang on until the very end. All right. So the audit should be done by an audit committee. The audit committee should exist of 3 non-check signers, so 3 people in the unit that are not signatories on the bank account. They can't be related to any check signer, so again, it can't be the spouse of the treasurer or the president if they're signatories on the account. And the treasurer cannot be on the audit committee, but they should be available to the audit committee for questions. And that audit committee will provide the documentation of their findings to the unit membership, usually at the yearly, the big wrap-up meeting at the end of the year. They'll give their report. There is a sample audit report in the resource guide. You can see here, it's also sometimes called the financial review form, sample audit report. This is really all it needs to be when they do the report. So they look through all the records. They basically, they take all the records from the treasurer's report and from the monthly reconciliations. They add up all the numbers on both ends of it. They balance it out. They look through all the bills and make sure nothing looks kind of shady. They look at the checks that you've written and make sure that you're not writing checks out to cash or doing anything that's against procedures. And then they say, yes, we didn't find any issues. It's correct. We couldn't finish it. It's incomplete. It is correct, but we found a couple of issues, so it's correct now. Or there's some major issues, with the unit, and they would date it, sign it, and put it in there. And again, if your yearly audit is not completed and you file an insurance claim for a financial matter, the insurance company will not honor the claim. The first thing they're going to ask for after the monthly reconciliations, they're going to ask for your last year's audit. If you don't have those 2 things, they're going to tell you, sorry, we can't honor your financial claim. One of the questions I just had about the PTA audit is we have some smaller units that are having trouble getting an audit committee together. If for some reason you're in one of those units that you just don't have enough volunteers to get 3 or 4 people together that outside of your the signatories on the account, or nobody wants to volunteer for it, if you contact your region director, the region directors will a lot of times actually send people from the region in to help you do your audit. This way you can meet the criteria of having the audit done without getting the signatories involved. They'll be more than happy to help you with that, so just shoot them an email and let them know. Okay. Speaking of insurance, so because you're a member units of the New York State PTA, we provide very, very low-cost insurance for each of our units. I think the last time we figured it out, based on, I think it's the $325 that we're charging you for insurance coverage to get the same amount of coverage. If you just went out and tried to get it by yourself, it would be well over $6,000–7,000. So it's definitely a cost savings that we can provide to the units. Insurance is required for every unit. The insurance payment is due on the 15th of every year for the following year's coverage. So for the people that paid their insurance for this year, The $325 is actually due on June 15th of this year. So it's you pay on the 15th for the following fiscal year. After the insurance is paid, the certificates of insurance are mailed directly to the unit after the payment is received. If for some reason your unit sent the insurance payment in and you have not gotten your certificate of insurance yet, please contact our office, or you can call AIM directly, who's our insurance company, and they will find out why you have not gotten your certificate yet. Coverage includes directors and officers, which covers anything that your directors or officers might get sued for, being a director or officer of the unit. Crime, so anything that gets stolen, including financial loss. And liability, so if something happens during one of your events, somebody gets hurt, they will cover that claim as well. There are some optional coverages that are available. When you guys got the packet, your unit got their packet at the beginning of the year, there were some things out of like terrorism insurance, and there's some cyber insurance and things like that that are available to the units, again, at a very good cost, but they're not required coverage. The insurance company also gives us stop, pause, and playlist activities. These used to be the red, green, and yellow, white activities. So if you look in the insurance guide that's on the website, there's a list of different activities, and they tell you whether it's safe for you guys to do, whether you should think about doing a few extra things before you do it, and whether you shouldn't do them at all. Stop activities are things that should not be done definitely at all, because if you do a stop activity and you have a claim, the insurance company, again, may not pay the claim. If you guys have an event, an incident that you need to submit to the insurance company, you can submit it directly to AIM. There are forms, again, online. You can fill out the form and mail it in, or you can actually email it to AIM at aimcompanies.com. A good thing is always to include your region director, just so they're aware of what's going on with any insurance issues. And quite possibly the biggest insurance issue that we have is playgrounds. This is the big one. This is the one that everybody thinks that the PTA is there for, is to provide playgrounds. So the official statement of the PTA is that in reviewing the mission and purpose, PTA should not fund the construction of playgrounds. It can advocate and should advocate to the school district and community to provide a playground. PTA parents and communities can actually form a separate organization whose purpose it is to raise funds to build or pay for a playground, but that organization should be completely separate from the PTA with its own bank account, non-profit status, insurance, etc. It should have no connection with the PTA. And the reason for this is the building of the playground is a high-risk activity. It's on the stop list for insurance coverage. So in consideration of the fiscal and liability risks, it's the official recommendation that PTAs do not take on the project of building or providing a playground. Along the same lines, field trips and transportation. This is number 2, the second question we always get when it comes to insurance and stuff. PTA position is that the PTA should not pay for things the school district should be paying for as a part of the student's educational program. However, if the PTA does decide to fund or partially fund field trips, the funds should be granted to the district and let the district pay the vendors. PTA should never pay providers directly, and PTA should never pay or ask parents, transport parents to the field trips. It's not recommended. A lot of school districts have policy about parents going back and forth, and the PTA insurance will not cover something if something happens and the PTA parent drives their own vehicle to the field trip. Again, along those lines, we're going to talk about if you did decide that you really have to help out with the playground or help out with the field trip or something like that. The way that we recommend you do it is that you can give a grant to the school district. There is a very set of rules that you need to follow, though, to give grants to the school district in the proper way. The first one would be that there should be some sort of application or evaluation criteria. So the school district should come to you and say, hey, we have this field trip we'd like to do. Can the PTA help us out? You would have them fill out some sort of application or a form stating what they're asking for the money for. The PTA decides, yes, we will grant the money to the school. The school district actually has to accept the grant funds as a Board of Education resolution. That must be understood in the grant itself that there's no future responsibility for the PTA, and the district should provide you with the full accounting of the funds spent, just like any other grant. We get grants from the state. we have to account for every penny of that grant that we spend. This is no different. This should not be done, though, however, to provide financial assistance to the school. So if the school comes to the PTA and says, yeah, our budget's a little close. We need a couple $100,000 to make it up. That's not the kind of thing you want to grant money for. The most important thing to remember here is that this does not absolve the PTA of all liability, but it will lessen its exposure. So even if you grant the money to the school for a playground, somebody gets hurt in the playground, they can still come after you, in court. It will probably not go anywhere because you granted the money, but it could. It has happened where PTAs have gotten sued even after granting the money, and they've had to pay the claim. So now I'm going to talk about the budget a little bit. So the budget is basically just a plan of how you're going to do things financially throughout the year. It's not a written in stone. You should not spend any more than this. You should not bring in any more than this. It's a plan. This is what we're planning to do. First thing is the budget is, while it's your responsibility as treasurer, you should not be the only person making up the budget. The budget, we recommend that you get a committee of 3 to 5 members together. It can be, the treasurer, the president, and the secretary. It could be the president, the treasurer, and general members. It could be the treasurer and general members. It doesn't really matter who's on the committee. It's just always a good idea to get other people on there. One, because it's a big job to make a budget, and two, you're not doing it insulated from everybody else. You can kind of get an idea of what other people want to do that year. And sometimes people have some great ideas for fundraisers and programs that you might not have thought of. So it's always a good idea to get some input from a committee. Again, the budget doesn't happen in a, it doesn't happen, you shouldn't forget about last year's budget. So you should review the prior year's actual versus what you budgeted for, and see, what you brought in last year, how much you spent last year, and then kind of base your budget off of that. You should determine how much money you will need to cover the anticipated expenses, how are you going to pay for those expenses, fundraisers, memberships, and so on. And then you draft a preliminary budget based on the budget committee's projections. You would then present that to the PTA board for consideration, recommended changes, and then the final budget that you would present would have to be presented at a general PTA meeting. So that's a meeting with regular members, not just your board, for approval. A majority vote of all the members present is required for adoption. As always, you have to have a quorum for a vote. And the adoption of the budget actually authorizes the PTA to spend the unit funds for expenses that are covered in the budget. If you don't have a budget in place when the next fiscal year rolls over, you technically should not spend any money until the budget is approved. So let's talk about that for a second, because there's always a little tricky thing. So for example, New York State, we don't actually approve our budget at the state level until usually the end of August at our summer leadership conference. We have a board meeting of the New York State PTA. But obviously our fiscal year ends, June, at the end of June. So for the month of July and most of the month of August, we can't not spend money. We have bills to pay like everything else. We have expenses, and we bring money in. So what we actually do is we have a kind of a preliminary budget that we get approved by the board, our whole board, that says this is our preliminary budget. We're going to spend this money, and it's okay that we're spending this money until our final budget is approved in August. So if you have, if you don't normally have your big meeting in the beginning of the year, instead of at the end of the year, like a lot of units do, it's okay for your outgoing boards to say, okay, this is our preliminary budget for the summer. This is what we think we're going to spend. And then you can vote your main budget in September, when you have your big meeting with everybody in it. So as long as there's something somewhere that's kind of guiding you, what you're spending, it's okay that you don't have an actual budget at the end of the year. But really, you don't want to do that for too long. You want to make sure that you have an actual budget voted on by your members before you start spending the majority of the funds. Another big thing we had asked about is the membership dues in the budget. So when you're creating the budget, you should only put in the amount that your unit keeps under income. So, for example, you have 10 members, they pay $10 each for membership. Well, 4 of that is going to New York State PTA, so that's not the unit's money. You don't need to show that in your budget or on your reconciliations or in your ledger, because that $4 doesn't belong to the unit, it belongs to the New York State PTA. So what you should do is show $60 on the income line, and you can report, usually there's what they call a below the line part of the budget where you put notes in, and you can just report that 40 of that was sent to the New York State PTA as a portion for the national and state dues. The reason we do this is if you have some units that get a lot of members, when it comes to tax filing time, they don't want to show, they want to make sure that they're under $50,000 of their receipts coming in, because if they go above $50,000, then they have to do the harder tax forms, and sometimes that membership income will tip the scales as to whether or not they're going to be above or below $50,000. And really, it's just the looking at the accounting, that's just the right way to do it. Okay. So you guys got this great budget, and a few months go on and something happens and you need to amend the budget. That's perfectly okay. You can amend the budget at any time. Any amendments must be voted on by the general membership. Again, it would have to be a majority vote of the membership present at a general meeting, or they can call a special meeting for that particular purpose, and like any vote, quorum is needed. Okay. And once we're done with the slides, I'm going to actually bring up a sample budget, and we can talk about what a budget looks like and whatnot at that point. Okay. So now we're going to talk about taxes. Yes, we are not for profit. Yes, we are non-tax, but you still have to file your taxes every year. All PTAs have to file. The fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th, so you should file between July 1st and 11/15. 11/15 is the drop date. You have to have your taxes filed by 11/15. The 2017 return is for 7/1/17 to 6/30/18. So a lot of the times we get units are confused looking at the years that they're filing. So it says this is the 2017 return. The IRS always looks at that date of the return is the year that you started. So for units that are filing right now in 2018, this would actually be the 2017 return because it was from 7/1/17 to 6/30/18. Next year when you file, it'll be the 2018 return because it will be from 7/1/18 to 6/30/19. That's something that a lot of people will get confused over. And there are different forms you can file. If your gross receipts are less than $50,000, you can do the e-postcard filing, or what's called a 990N. You can actually go online and file it for free at the IRS website, or there's a couple different websites you can go to. If your gross receipts are over $50,000 but below $200,000, you can file the 990EZ. It's a little easier form. Easy is kind of a misnomer because I don't find it very easy to file, but it is easier than filing the full 990. And if you're over $200,000, then you probably need to get an actual accountant and pay somebody to do your taxes, because the 990 the full 990 is very hard to do. If you fill out a 990EZ or a 990 file form, you also have to fill out the Schedule A. If for some reason you can't get your taxes done by 11/15, you can request an extension. It's an automatic extension. It's a form 8878. You just fill out the form. There's no waiting to get approved for it. It's an automatic extension. If you can't get it done by the 15th, at the very least, please file for the extension by 11/15. Otherwise, it's a huge pain if you miss the deadline. And all documents are downloadable in PDF format from the IRS website, irs.gov. Again, I mentioned the e-postcard filing. You can file electronically. With paperless, you can do it. There's the link there. A few other gotchas. The employer identification number is also called a TIN in some of the forms. It's the same thing. Your employer identification number is on your letter of determination. I believe it should also be on the front of your bylaws as well. I mentioned about the tax year. It's the beginning of the fiscal year. When they ask for the legal name of your unit, it should be what's on the front of your bylaws. It has to match, as well as the mailing address. The mailing address is usually the address of the school because that's static. You know, we don't want to have to change the address with the IRS every 2 or 3 years when you get a new president. It may ask for any other organization names the organization uses. So if you're John F. Kennedy High School, you will put down, you know, sometimes we're called JFK High School, and so on. It will ask for the name and address of the principal officer. That is the address of the officer at the time you're filing the taxes. So if you're a brand new president this year and you're filing taxes right now, it wants your name and address as the principal officer, not the address of the outgoing president. If your organization has a website address, you can put that on there. You don't have to. Excuse me. And it will ask you to confirm if you're filing the e-postcard that your gross receipts are normally $50,000 or less. So what happens if you forget to file your taxes? Don't panic. First thing that you have to know is that there's 3 things that keep the IRS happy. File your annual return, file it on time, file a complete return. If the return is not complete, they don't consider it filed. Again, I mentioned if you absolutely positively cannot file your taxes by the 15th of November, file for an extension. It's a 6-month extension. You get it just for applying, but you have to apply for it by November 15th. You can't do it the 16th. If they won't accept it, your taxes will be considered late. Later non-filed taxes basically equate to possible penalties and possible loss of exemption. If for some reason you didn't file your taxes or request an exemption by November 15th, file the Form 990 immediately. You can try filing the 990 easy, depending on how the IRS is feeling that particular day. They might let you, they might not. Even if you dismiss it once, your unit may be imposed a penalty by the IRS for filing late. I've never heard of it. Typically, if you don't file for a couple of years, they'll do a penalty, but if you're late for 1 year, you're usually okay. However, if your unit has not filed for 3 years consecutive, it's an automatic loss of tax exempt status.
So we get a half hour, which is fine.
No questions, no asking you for the things. Your unit will just get a letter stating that they have lost their tax exempt status because they did not file for 3 consecutive years. So what does that actually mean? So if you guys get a letter stating that you've lost your tax exempt status from the IRS, don't panic. There's a process to have it reinstated, but contact your region director immediately and we can get that kick-started for you. We actually have a specialist that works, a volunteer specialist that kind of works for us. It's our financial specialist, Joanne Calcaterra. She is basically at this point an expert at getting units reinstated. She has contacts at the IRS that she can contact to kind of get the skinny on what's going on and what we need to do. So we can get you guys reinstated. That's not the end of the world, but you need to contact us and let us know. But if you are revoked, there are certain things you can and can't do. You can continue to be a PTA. You can still sell memberships. You can still run your programs and events, pay your bills, keep the insurance. You can attend state and region PTA trainings, and most of all, you can still advocate for the children. What you can't do is you can't do things like use the state New York State tax exempt form for purchases. You can't solicit or accept tax deductible donations. You can't apply for any grants that would be not-for-profit, and you can't file a 990 until your status is actually reinstated. So you can do most things, you just can't do the stuff that you get the benefits from being a not-for-profit for, because at that point they're considering that you're not a not-for-profit. Okay.
Oh, you can have to do full-time if they have that position open.
And I'm getting some feedback here. Hi, there's somebody talking in the background. Can you guys make sure you're muted, please? Okay, just a couple more slides and I'll open up the floor to questions. The next biggest question that we get asked is about events or donations that benefit one student or family. So this is somebody that's a member of our unit or a member of our school, their house burned down or a tree fell on their house or things like that. Are we allowed to give money to them to help them out? The answer to that is no. The IRS says that you're not allowed to give funds to one specific family or a specific person. The way they actually say it is that the funds must be used to further the mission and purpose of the PTA. The PTA's purpose is not general welfare or disaster relief. So this even goes to, right now they have those horrible hurricanes that are happening down south. The PTAs can't donate money directly to relief efforts for that. They're not allowed to. The other rule is that the individual beneficiaries must be an eligible member of a charitable class. What that basically means is they must be large enough that potential beneficiaries cannot be individually identified, or sufficiently indefinite the community as a whole rather than the pre-selected group of people benefits when a charity provides assistance. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't help in other ways. There are ways you can help. Obviously, you can do things not as a PTA. There's also, the Sunshine Fund that a lot of units have. However, you have to be really careful with the Sunshine Fund, and my official position on the Sunshine Fund is that you can't have one. There's actually IRS regulations that specifically forbid, and they use the term sunshine and rainy day funds. As a not-for-profit, you're not allowed to have those. We understand that units do. We can't stop you, but we will ask that you don't have it on the budget line. You don't reconcile it with any of your other financials. You don't keep the money in your PTA bank account, and it needs to be completely separate from anything else that the PTA does financially. Okay. That being said, working with other groups, it is okay to team with other groups. The other groups should be 501c3 organizations or other not-for-profits, so you can team with your school district. It's okay to team with something like the American Cancer Society for a fun run, things like that. But there are certain things that you have to make sure happen ahead of time. First and foremost, you should keep everything, have everything agreed upon ahead of time. Who's going to do what as far as the labor goes, who's going to pay for what, and who gets the proceeds. So if you're doing something with the American Cancer Society, you might decide that, well, you guys are going to pay for this, we'll pay for that. All the expenses or all the proceeds are going to go to the American Cancer Society. As long as it's all decided ahead of time and it's written down somewhere in case you need it after the fact, that's fine. The other important thing is that all funds have to be accounted for from both groups, incoming and outgoing. So if you're paying for some of those expenses, you have to account for them. Proceeds have to be accounted for that they're going to the American Cancer Society, and a report would be available to both groups at the end of the event. That gets very complicated, so if any of you decide that you want to do that, please talk to me maybe outside of this first, just because that gets very, very complicated, and the IRS is very, very tricky about that, but it can certainly be done. Just a few resources. Again, on the website is the New York State PTA Resource Guide. Section 5 is the Treasury section. On the website, there's a couple of places about running your PTA Treasury information. National PTA has an e-learning library. They also have the back-to-school kit. Your region treasurer and director are great resources if you have any questions, or you can come directly to me, and my email address is there. Okay. So that is all the slides I have. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I can either open up the floor to questions if anybody has any questions, or I can, I do have some sample, I do have a sample budget I was going to go over. I can do that. So you guys let me know what you want to do.
I have a question.
Okay.
Hi, this is Angela Riley from Binghamton PTSA, and we are confused about the member hub process now, and how we are now going to be charged for use of the service if our members decide to pay for their membership using Member Hub.
Okay, that's actually, I don't have a whole lot to do with the Member Hub system. The person you want to talk to is Dana Welch. However, I will say that because for the last few years that we've been doing online memberships, the New York State PTA has been kind of absorbing those membership, the credit card fees.
Yes.
It's become really a financial burden for us to do so. So we've passed it on, put it back out to the units. The units certainly don't have to accept the credit card payments. They can still accept payments online. But it's from what I've been told, it's a very minimal amount.
Right, but when your unit only receives $1, a minimal amount over time is substantial.
Mm-hmm.
So
I understand.
I wanted to know the process for deciding to move forward, because again, as a nonprofit agency that's writing off or absorbing those costs,
Mm-hmm.
as an entity, you can reap benefit for it, whereas these smaller units cannot.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no discussion about moving to this member hub, and it has caused, again, we're a very small unit, but it has caused significant concern, particularly for parents that are not able to come into the school during office hours to drop off payment, whereas use of the New York State hub allowed them to pay online without penalizing the individual unit.
Mm-hmm. I understand that, and I can tell you there was a lengthy discussion at the state level about it. I don't really have a specific answer for you right now. I would ask you to reach out to your region director and to the membership person, who is Lori Zaman. She can kind of give you the rationale a little better than I could.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Hi, Sean. It's Pat Janko from Nassau Region.
Hey, Pat.
I have a question. I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I was wondering if you could fill me in or educate me about the file990.org on the New York State PTA website. Are we going to ask our units to file their 990s that way and then report it on Member Hub? Or is there a way to do the reporting on Member Hub?
Units can file the 990s however they'd like. We do recommend using file 990 because it's easy.
Okay.
It's the cheapest, that we found. But because we are not making them use the file 990 system, I mean, they can file by paper if they really want it to. That's up to them. We don't have the two link. They still have to, put under the Member Hub system that they filed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Hi, Sean. This is Sherry from Suffolk County Region.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi. I just wanted to double check when you had said about the donation of money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what PTAs are not supposed to donate any money to any other group. Does that include another 501c group or no?
They can donate money to another 501c3 organization as long as the stated issue mission of that organization is the same as their own. So, for example, you could donate. So when we had the last disaster we had in Texas, the Texas PTA was actually soliciting funds from other PTAs.
Okay.
We could do that because we were donating from 501c3 a PTA to another 501c3 PTA. The missions were the same. Their stated purpose was the same. So that was okay to do. Where it gets tricky is if you're donating to something like the American Red Cross, whose stated mission is disaster relief, whereas the PTA's mission is not disaster relief. Again, this isn't a PTA thing, it's an IRS thing. They get very, very sticky about that kind of stuff.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Sean, it's Pat Janko again. I just wanted to say thank you very much for doing this.
You are more than welcome.
And
Nice
I'm
to be
hoping
here.
that
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm hoping that a lot of the units from Nassau are on here. But again, I really do thank you very much.
It's nice to be able to do something like this. I know a lot of people can't make it to the summer trainings, and we were trying to find a way to get this information out. So it's kind of a nice thing to do. If nobody else has any questions, I'm going to take the last 10 minutes, and you'll see I kind of put up a sample budget on the screen here. This is another question that we get asked by a lot of units, is about, how do I work my budget and make it work for us? Because a lot of units, they've been building on budgets that just either they're doing it from paper and trying to move it over to a spreadsheet, or it's in 5 or 6 different places, and it seems to be, for some units, a very rough thing. So I will just go over a couple of things here on the sample budget I made. If you guys have any questions while I'm doing this, by all means, speak up. There's only 14 of you on the call, so I think I can handle 14. When it gets to like 25 or so, then I'm kind of worried about 25 people yelling at me. So you can see in the sample budget here, we have it separated into income and expenses. The top part of the budget is anything that your unit's going to be bringing in for the year, and the bottom part is anything that they're going to be paying out for the year. You can see that there's budget lines here. The way that I recommend that you do your budgets is, you can see that there's kind of bolded lines, and there's kind of like little italicized lines here after the fact. So it's really hard to run a unit and have to nitpick every single line of the budget and say, well, we can't spend more than that because we didn't budget for more than that. So what I always recommend to people is to keep your budget kind of as vague as possible. And so instead of having the members vote on, we're going to spend this much on back to school night, this much on the fall carnival, this much on the Christmas shop, this much on the spring dance, say, okay, for all of our fundraisers, we plan on bringing in $4,950. You can break this down for them to say, this is what we anticipate bringing in for each one, but what they're actually going to be voting on are these bolded items. So when your back to school night only brings in, $500, but your fall carnival brings in $3,000 that makes up for it, you don't have to go and adjust your budget and have a vote to make the budget match what you actually brought in. As long as that bolded fundraisers line is still going to come in at about what you expect it to come in, you're good. So it allows you to kind of be a little more flexible in between the lines than it would otherwise. The other important thing is if you have something that you're going to be like a fundraiser, but you need to spend money on it. So for example, I have a spring dance here. You expect to make $650 on the spring dance, but the spring dance, you're going to have to buy decorations and stuff. You'll see at the same point, I also have down here under the expense part, an expense for the spring dance of $100. So while we expect to bring in $650 for the spring dance, we also expect to spend, $100 going out. It's a little easier to keep track of things this way with going in and going out than saying, well, for the spring dance, we expect to make $550, but of that, we're going to spend $100, so really we made $650. It's not as clean when you're looking at ins and outs for it. And it's hard to tell somebody that they have a budget for so much for an event when it's not actually, written down in the budget. So what this allows you to do is go to that spring dance committee and say, okay, you guys have $100 to spend on whatever you need to purchase for the spring dance, because that's what's in the budget. Okay. You'll also notice that I have 2 columns in the budget. I have last year's actual and I have this year's budget. So when I talked about the process of actually making a budget, you don't just pull these numbers out of thin air. You actually need to look at what you spent last year and what you're going to decide what you're going to spend this year. So if you look at all of these numbers, you'll see that what I budgeted this year for income is probably a little less than what we brought in last year, just to be kind of on the safe side. And when we're looking at expenses, so this is a perfect example. So last year we spent $725 on a guest author. We're not planning on doing a guest author this year. It wasn't such a good thing last year. We had a problem with them, so we're not going to budget to bring it in. So we're going to leave that line blank and not even budget for it. So you kind of look at what you did last year and base this year's budget off of what you did last year. Another important thing is when you're actually preparing the budget itself, you should always budget for a net zero. So whatever you budget to take in, you should budget to spend. That's part of being, you know, a not-for-profit is you don't want to have any profit at the end of the year. Now, we know that's not realistic because you're always going to either spend more than you bring in or bring in more than you spend. It's never going to come out perfectly. However, there are ways to kind of mitigate that, and there's actually this very last line here is something that most units should probably have anyways. It's a line I'm going to call reserve funds. So even though you're not for profit, you are allowed to, and it's a good idea to have, you know, a little bit of money year from year that you're kind of carrying over for unforeseen expenses next year, or you know, your first fundraiser isn't until October, but you're doing an event in September that you're going to need money for, so you know, need to have money sitting in the bank to pay for that event before your fundraisers come in, things like that. So we actually recommend that units carry half to 50% to 100% of what their typical yearly expenditures come out to in a reserve, like a reserve line, reserve bank account that's just sitting there in case you guys need it. The IRS allows you to do that. There is no IRS guidelines as to how much is too much. They tell you that if you have too much in reserves, they may do an audit and come talk to you. But if you can pin them down for a number, God bless you, and please let me know, because I've been trying for 3 or 4 years now to pin them down to how much is too much. They won't tell you. So we estimate, you know, about half to a whole amount, or a whole year's expenses. So when you're budgeting, what you want to see is this net line should be 0. You should budget for to spend whatever you bring in by just putting a little bit into your reserve fund, because it's always a good idea to keep those reserves built up. So what the nice thing about this is, what this lets you do is, now that you have this spreadsheet with all this information on there, you can add a column, and that'll be this year actual. And you actually can put down in there month by month what you actually brought in. So for the first month, you brought in $300. Fundraisers, you didn't do that one yet. Oh, back to school night you probably did first. So we'll say you brought in you had a good back to school night. Your fall carnival didn't happen yet. Christmas shop didn't happen yet. Spring dance obviously didn't happen yet. Excuse me. Sponsorships, you know, you got $200 worth of sponsorships. You took in $50 worth of just straight donations. You don't have any miscellaneous income yet. You guys did pay for your insurance. You paid your council dues already. Spent $10 in postage. So you see what I'm doing is I'm just kind of going down the line here and seeing, well, what did we spend this month? And I'm adding it onto here. The bottom line here is going to be, when you're done, you've got your report for your meeting. You have what you've taken in and what you've spent since the last report. You just keep adding onto this column, and at the end you've got your report. There, it's done. You know, you can have that done in about 20 minutes versus the 3 or 4 hours I've heard some people, you know, take agonizing over these monthly financial reports. So it's an easy way, if you're using a spreadsheet, to get all that kind of stuff done. Last couple of minutes, anybody have any questions about this kind of stuff?
Hi, Sean. I just want to interject. This is Jane Harsha, the Vice President of Leadership Development. And I just want to thank everyone who was on the webinar for taking part tonight. I know everybody is very busy this time of year. We really appreciate your participation. And also, I'd like to thank Sean for doing the presentation, and our Communications and Marketing Manager, Amy Tweedy, who has facilitated the technical part. And then just make one last plug for October 9th, which is our next webinar on bylaws and procedures. If you have any questions about that, if you need to do procedures or you have bylaws in the future, this is a good webinar for you. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
One last thing, if anybody has any questions, you know, this I know we went over a lot of information. I think I have 30-something slides I went over. It will be available. Is it on the website already, Amy, or did you email it out to people, I think?
Slides are out. They're on the website, and I emailed them out earlier today.
So if I went over something too quick and you don't have the slides, please download them and look at them.
Yep, there's
a link in
the chat.
Yeah. If something sinks in and you have a question, please by all means email me, and I will be more than happy to answer it for you. Again, I appreciate all of you guys showing up, and That's all I got.
Dawn, can you share that share that spreadsheet with me? I'll put that on the website too.
Yeah, I'll send you a blank copy. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording now.
All right.